Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, desolate, search, peasants, vassals, minions. I'm a useful idiot, and it's 2014, and the first thing I want to talk about in 2014 is banker scum. One of my favorite topics of 2013. In fact, that was one of my favorite topics of 2013, 2012, 2011, 2010, 2009, 2008. And I'm sure it popped up once or twice before that as well. And but let me get back to banker scum specifically. And this is a story from a few months ago, but it's a pretty important one. It's a story about basically a major bank operating as a vampire. And this is Royal Bank of Scotland. And as it turns out, what they basically were doing was preying on businesses that were clients of theirs. And they would create manufactured defaults, is what they called them. So in other words, they changed the name, changed the rules of the game after businesses signed on for their services. And they would cause defaults in these businesses so that they could basically seize the businesses, liquidate their assets, and cash in on them. And so this is about as banker scummy as you get. So let's look at the 5 basic ways that they would undermine these businesses. First one was selling interest rate hedging products under false pretenses and often under stress or under duress as a condition of continued funding support. So in other words, it was used to blackmail the businesses once they're on the hook, getting them to buy credit default swaps and other interest rate hedging products where the bankers really make their money and put these people on the hook. And then, of course, they put the screws on adjusting the rates that they have to pay for these interest rate swaps. So there's some blackmail. Then the second way they would undermine these businesses, they'd remove their overdraft facilities at 48-hour notice. So a business that was running their books negatively and being creative in their accounting, of course, would have this option of being able to pay an overdraft removed, which would create a manufactured default. And number 3, an arbitrary change to the terms and conditions of loan agreements, including raising interest rates, adding charges, and dramatically shortening loan maturities. So all these different ways of screwing your client after you sign a contract and having arbitrary changes in the terms and conditions of loan agreements and raising interest rates and adding charges. Of course, we see this in all of corporate America. Anybody that pays a phone bill or a cable bill certainly knows that. And then one of the ways they can do this is number 4, which is losing or then recreating lending agreements. So the bank can say that, oh, well, we lost your original agreement, but we've come up with another copy. And then the changes would be instigated then in this new contract. And then number 5, placing of false valuations on the customer's commercial property assets using tame firms of chartered surveyors. So in other words, basically lowballing the valuations on these properties, basically so when they put the company into default and seize its assets, they get rock bottom prices. And then they work with tame firms to estimate and value these assets. And of course, one example of this is a company in the United States is a company like Ernst Young. That was an accounting firm that worked with a lot of the big banks when they were raping the economy, and then were also the same accounting firm that was hired to handle resolving the collapse. And so cashing in on both ends of that deal. But let's get back to Royal Bank of Scotland. So this is what they would do. They would set up these businesses to fail, but it gets even scummier than that, because they did just several hundred case studies and found out that this practice was not necessarily systematic, but it was systemic. And when you do the numbers, it turns out that tens of thousands of businesses were chewed up and preyed on by Royal Bank of Scotland alone. Tens of thousands of businesses. Because this has been going on since 1992. They set up these systems in 1992 to profit off distressed borrowers. So this has been going on for some 20 years now. So tens of thousands of businesses destroyed, undermined, and preyed on, savaged by the Royal Bank of Scotland. And then they take it a step further because they had Royal Bank of Scotland had a unit called the Recovery and Restructuring Unit. And at the Royal Bank of Scotland, it's called the GRG. And the unit is dressed up as a unit that helps distressed corporate borrowers to get back on their feet. But what it actually does is works the opposite. And it saddles the business coming to them for help with additional fees and charges, and even uses highly paid amateur consultants. And so they basically, once they have the company on its knees, then they put it through this grinder dressed up as a unit to help the struggling business. And in fact, what is the percentage? According to the Royal Bank of Scotland's own documents from 2012 report, only 6% of corporate and commercial borrowers who enter their recovery and restructuring unit, GRG, survive. So that means 94% of the businesses that go to this branch of Royal Bank of Scotland get chewed up and spit out. And what they do is, once a client firm is zombified and milked for all the fees they can get, it goes into administration process. And this is a collusion between the banks and the accounting firms. Like I mentioned earlier, companies in the U.S. like Ernst Young. So then the commercial property assets are transferred to the Royal Bank of Scotland to their property arm, West Register, at, like I say, fire bottom prices. I've attached a couple documents about this whole Royal Bank of Scotland scam below, and there's a couple of specific cases, and they show exactly how they swindle these people out of their properties and their businesses, and basically liquidate them and get expensive assets for a tenth of the price, including, like I say, putting false valuations on it. And these aren't important to point out that these aren't just failing businesses anyway. All of them were profitable, stable, credit-worthy businesses that were preyed on by a vampire banking system, in this case, Royal Bank of Scotland. But here's a little shout-out to my compatriot, Jeffrey Dowdy. And what do we say about banks, Jeff? We say that if one bank is doing it, they're all doing it. And I assure you that if this Royal Bank of Scotland has this whole system set up, and that it's been operating for nearly 20 years unfettered, and they've managed to liquidate 94% of the businesses they put through this chain of events, I can assure you that almost every other too-big-to-fail bank on the planet, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Credit Suisse, all the rest, I'm sure they're involved in these same practices. So one bank is involved in tens of thousands of businesses being preyed on fraudulently and caused to collapse, to liquidate their assets by this monster bank. And that's just one bank. So there you have it. Banker scum marching into the 21st century. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.